Operational definitions presented. What are two variables that must be defined in the study? Independent variable is changing for intervention. Dependent variable affected by the intervention. Failing to carefully define responses can lead to poorly controlled studies. Why must we define our variables carefully? Could lead to poor outcomes. Our variables should be detailed, must be defined, defining the parameters of the independent and dependent variable, state the typography. Operational definitions state the typography of behavior. How should you respond if you hear the phrase, "He engages in behavior"? Everyone engages in behavior. We should be saying problem behavior. What is an operational definition? It describes the concept in a manner that everyone can see and measure it. It's observable in measurable terms. It allows us to measure the behavior reliably, that everyone is taking the data on the same thing. Therefore, the most precise operational definition is the best: observable, measurable, and quantifiable. What are some considerations to define a behavior? Why are you defining a behavior? What details are needed for reliable measurement? What are the temporal dimensions of the behavior? Are you measuring the behavior of an independent or a group? Specify sensitivity. What is the intervention you are doing? How do you create an operational definition? One word that captures the essence of what you are structuring. Always structure your operational definition what person is doing, not what they aren't doing. Compliance. What would you see if you saw someone engaging in that behavior? During class, sitting in a seat, holding a pen. Pinpoint. Gives contents for the observation trying to observe. Movement cycle consists of an action word and a noun. What is the test of an appropriate operational definition? Inter-observer agreement, an IOA. The Deadman's test was described by Lindsay in 1965. What is it? If a deadman can do it, it ain't behavior, and if a deadman can't do it, then it is behavior. How does it work? Focus is on what they are doing, not what they aren't doing. Specific and precise. No, do not put a child is not finishing, but rather say child is twirling pen and draws a picture on a paper. Define learning channels. Senses used for input and output. What are some common learning channels? See, hear, say, smell, touch, taste, feel. Operational definitions are not goals. You should not include a given statement, given test. Criterion. Say how you're going to be measured. What are some common mistakes people make when defining behavior? Assuming internal causes, mentalism. Assumptions, always, consistently, never. Vague, because of ADD, explanatory fiction, or a goal. Why should behavior analysis avoid the term STEM? It's an internal assumption, explanatory fiction. Assume repetitive behaviors are self-stimulatory. Indirect assessment presentation. What is an indirect assessment? Reports of others. What two types of group usually complete an indirect assessment? Stakeholders going to use the plan, teachers, parents, coaches, family members, friends, individuals themselves, if they can provide reliable information. What are some ways to administer an indirect assessment? Fill out form. Groups fill it out together. Pass a copy around that all groups can fill it out. Interview individuals or groups. Get the best data if to do a one-on-one interview. What are the advantages of indirect assessments? Easy to administer, little resources, complete in a short amount of time, good for those who have too much to do. Describe each of the indirect assessments presented in class. Motivational Assessment Scale, MAS, is the oldest. It has 16 questions, 0 to never, 6 always. An added category, most category, behavior to change. Functional Assessment Interview, FAI, open-ended, longest, comprehensive of all the tools. Questions about behavioral function, ABF. Rank questions, most categories of behavior of change. Functional analysis, a screening tool, FAST. Yes, no, format. Open-ended, yes, it's functional. What are the disadvantages in indirect assessments? Why can't you use these tools accessibly to determine the function of problem behavior? What is response bias? By Plausi in 1991. Responding to questionnaire items some other basis other than the content given. What are the different types of response bias? Social response bias. Responder answers question in a way it's socially acceptable. Respond to questions to what others want to hear. Acquisitions is circle most yes responses. Extreme response bias, end of the scale to respond to questions. Which assessments seem like they are most prone to response bias and what types? Is the opinions of behavior bias will show thoroughly. What are other reasons the indirect assessment should not be used as a standalone tool? It may not identify the correct function. Tests of reliability to validity are inconclusive. Reliability, ability of a test to assess some way every time. Validity, test what it says it tests. FAST, reliability below the exceptional threshold for standalone use. QABF is the highest reliability of the scales, and the modest should not be used in isolation of fiction. Why are indirect assessment at all? Convenient, use effective in compound packages. Pre-information is always good. Your summary of your indirect assessment should use observational terms, avoid explanatory fiction, summarize only what you see. You still need more information. What are the pluses and minuses to summary explanation in your presentation? Don't opinion reflection process. ABCs stand for antecedent behavior consequences. It was first described in the literature by Beijing, Pearson, and Altick in 1968. How does it compare to the indirect assessment? It's observing behavior. How is the ABC analysis constructed? Setting, observed, definition, antecedent, behavior, and consequences. When taking the data, record, frequency, duration of behavior. Observe over several days. How is the ABC checklist different from the narrative? It's easier to fill out. Dorothy Lawman and her colleagues found the ABC checklist more reliable than the narrative format. What are some disadvantages to the ABC? It's harder to do correctly the longer you do them. Needs to be completed in the moment for the most accurate. Bias of the data collector. Does not assess appropriate behavior without changing it. Define descriptive analysis. Describing what is happening with ABC is a form of descriptive analysis. How is partial interval recording done? Takes an observation and breaks it into smaller intervals, such as 10 to 15 seconds. That's how long the bins are. Observational recording problem behavior. Partial interval description analysis can be used to measure problem behavior, appropriate behavior, praise, adaptive skill. When summarizing data, calculating conditional probabilities, graphing ABC checklists, graphing partial interval data, stick to the facts, avoid exploratory fictions. Functional skills assessment presentation. What are the difference between testing, assessment, and diagnosis? One type of assessment is attempt to establish the cause of the disability, medical-based. Assessment focuses on identifying the individual's strengths and needs. How is norm reference assessment created? Compared performance of students to that of the normal group. Standard and example sample. Group administered test skill-based. Aptitude test, ability test, individually administered test. Must be reliable and valid. Test the things trying to measure. No matter what type of test is administered, it must be informal. Does not mean structural or implemented. Haphazardly. What are some of the informed strategies? Curriculum-based measurements, VP map, criterion, reference test based on criteria. Techniques using informants, checklists and rating scales, interviews and questionnaires, strength and limits of informal strategies, strengths, provide information not easily tested, formal strategies, administer more often, limitations, less structured, subjective, bias into scores. What does this information give us? Formal strategies, social communication, interests, and behaviors. Adapted skills, skills versus performance deficits. Possible replacement response. Age-appropriate goals. 2 tests for determining autism. ADOS, ADIR. Other tests used to determine symptoms but don't diagnose are CARS, Social Communication Questionnaire, Vineland-Abrams VB MAP. Describe the 2 behavioral analytical assessment of skills, their strengths, and their limitations. Idea where students are with motor, self-help, communication.